everyone. Today's lesson is going to be lesson 2, and it's about tenths and hundredths. So that means we are looking at the decimal values. So if you remember back to our previous lesson where we had our place value chart, tenths and hundredths are the two numbers that come right after the decimal place. So we're going to be looking at those two values today. So let's go ahead and get started. Remember to listen for your keyword. Alright, so tenths and hundredths. How can you write a fraction as a decimal? So sometimes we want to convert between the two. A fraction, such as 3/10 or 9/100ths, can be shown by a model. So sometimes we can take and use models to help represent what this actually looks like for us. Now, my models are not 100% accurate because I couldn't make them quite 100% accurate drawing them freehand. Not quite that capable. But you get the idea. So if we look at this first one, we have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We have 10 vertical bars making up this square. So this square represents one whole. There are 10 parts to make up one whole. 3 of those parts are being shaded. So that represents our 3/10. So that is showing it as a fraction. It's also the same as equals 0.3, which is also 3/10, because remember the number after the decimal is the tenths place value. All right, this next one here, once again, this whole should be a square. It's a little bit more of a rectangle, but this whole thing should represent one whole. So there are 10 columns here, and each column is consisting of 10 little boxes. So that gives us 100. So that means this is out of 100. And if we look at how many are shaded, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So this represents 9 out of the 100 squares, which equals 0.09, which represents our 9/100ths. So the word name for 3/10 is 3/10. So anytime you see 3/10, you'd call it 3/10. That also helps in terms of figuring out what it looks like as a decimal, because if we think about our place value chart, we know where the tenths should go. So 3/10 can be shown on a place value chart. Well, do we have any hundreds or tens? No, those don't exist. Do we have any ones? Nope. But for this, we want to have that 0. So sometimes, yes, I didn't write it in either of mine, but it's good to have that place value to show that we have 0 ones. We do not have a whole number. All we have is a fraction or a portion of a whole number. So we have our 0 ones, but we have how many tenths? Well, how many bars did we have filled in here? We had 3. So that's how we get our 3/10. Same is true for our 9/100ths. So once again, the word name for 9/100ths is, 9 over, I wrote that wrong, sorry. That should be hundredths, not thousands. Everyone makes mistakes, it's okay. Even I do. So the word name for 9/100ths is 9/100ths. It's out of 100. So 9/100ths can be shown on a place value chart. Once again, we want to put a 0 in for the ones because we don't have a whole number. If we look at this rectangle up here, it's not all filled in, and then we have 9 more. It's just, sorry, the light reflections are a little wonky on here. We just have those 9 boxes. Now, do we have a full column filled in? No, we don't. So over here, we had a full rectangle filled in. Here, we don't have that. So for our tenths, it's going to be 0 because we don't have any tenths in this. But we do have hundredths. We have those 9/100ths. So that's going to go right there. So that is how we write 9/100ths as a decimal. Okay? So once again, place value chart is going to be very helpful on this. Now, the big place value chart that we had from the last lesson, won't be as helpful because most of what we're going to be looking at are the numbers after the decimal place. So like I said, tenths and hundredths. So having just the ones, the decimal, tenths, and then hundredths, that's going to be what's going to help you the most for this. So just like this bottom little chart down here. So either one of these two charts here are going to be the most beneficial for you for today. So if you want to get that wrote down, feel free to. You can pause the video if need be. Alrighty. So your key word for this lesson, because what we're looking at is going from our fractions to decimals, your key word is decimals. Key word is decimals. Alrighty? Okay. So our next part, oops, maybe, there we go. So how can you use division to write a fraction as a decimal? So we want to write 3/5 as a decimal. So one way we can take and do this is to actually use division and divide 3 by 5. Another way is to take and convert our fraction into an equivalent fraction from what we looked at. But we'll go ahead and use the division. So we have 3 and we're dividing it by 5. So that means the 5 is going on the outside and the 3 is going underneath. Now, can 5 go into 3? No, 3 is a lot smaller. So what we have to do is we're going to add a 0. But we can't just add a 0 willy-nilly. That changes everything. So we have to have a decimal in here, and we're going to have the decimal there because that's how we're going to get our decimal place. So now, how many times can 5 go into 30? Well, it can go in 6 times. 5 times 6 is 30. So we're going to put our 30 down here. Remember, we subtract these, we get a remainder of 0, which is what we're looking for. We want to have either just 1 time through or 2 times since we're dealing with tenths and hundredths. So our solution here is, how do we write 3/5 as a decimal? Well, it's 6 tenths. So remember, if we have one number after the decimal, it's always the tenths place. Okay? All right, same thing. How do we write 1/4 as a decimal? Well, once again, 4 is the denominator. That number on the bottom is what we're going to have on the outside. So 4 divided by 1. Can 4 go into 1? No, that's impossible. 4 is much bigger. So put the 0 up there. Now we're going to add a decimal after the 0 and after the 1, and then we're going to put a 10 there. Now, or sorry, not a 10, a 0 there to get 10. So now how many times can 4 go into 10? Twice. 4 times 2 is 8. Once again, we subtract. 10 minus 8 gives us 2. We have a remainder, so we're not done. So now we're going to tack another 0 on here, bring it down. Now we have 20. How many times can 4 go into 20? 5 times. 5 times 4 is 20. So it works out that we get just 0.25 or 25 hundredths. So remember, if we have 2 numbers after the decimal place, we are into the hundredths. 1 number after the decimal, like up here, is the tenths. 2 numbers gives us hundredths. Alrighty. Okay, so now we want to write each decimal as a fraction and each fraction as a decimal. So switching back and forth. So here we have 0.1. How would we write this as a fraction? Well, remember, if it's 1 place after the decimal, it's out of 10. So this is just 1/10. Sometimes saying it, the decimal aloud using proper math language is the best way to take and figure out what that fraction should be. So this is, if we say it, it's 1/10, so that gives us what our fraction is. What about this number here? We have 0.02. We're 2 places after the decimal, so that means we're in the hundredths. So we know it's going to be out of 100. And how many do we have? We have 2. So it's 2 hundredths. And that's exactly how we'd say that decimal as well, is 2 hundredths. All right, so now we have 9 tenths. How do we write 9 tenths? 0 point. Now, are we going to put the 9 or do we need to add a 0 first? We put the 9 because it's out of 10, and 10 is what comes the tenths, and that's what comes right after the decimal. So what about the last one here? 7 over 100 gives us 7 hundredths. So we're going to have 0 point. Did we put a 7 next, or do we have to put a 0? We put a 0, so we have 0, 7. So we have our 7 hundredths. All right, now, our last question on here, or sorry, second to last question on here. How are the two 4s in the decimal 44 hundredths related? Well, if we look, we have 44 hundredths. How are these 4s related here? Well, one is a tenth and one is a hundredth. So they are both a decimal place. They are both a fraction. So they are both a fraction of a whole. And they're separated by a place value. They're separated by one place value. All right, and the last question. How is 3/10 equal to 3/10? So if we think about this, how do we know these two things are equal? Well, it's the conversion between. We're going from fraction to decimal. Remember, your key word is decimals for this lesson. So they are related because 3 over 10, oops, sorry, I know the light's doing weird things, is equal to 0.3, 3/10, since they both, represent 3 of 10. So being as they are both taking and representing a fraction, they're both representing a portion of a whole number, they're representing 3 of that whole, that's how they're related. It's also the conversion between the two. So taking 3/10 and writing it from fraction to decimal, that is the conversion. So this is just looking at the conversion and seeing how that's related. So what you should get from this lesson is taking and seeing how to go from having a fraction to having a decimal and switching back and forth between those. So a lot of the problems that you're going to see are going to be numbers out of 10 or out of 100. Those are going to be the most common ones you'll be dealing with to really work on getting that place value. You'll have fewer of the 3/5 and the 1/4 since those do involve having to do the division or convert them into fractions that are out of 10 or out of 100 to help you get that solution. And same is true for, you're going to have the decimals and then you have to write them as fractions. So making sure to know, am I going to write this number over 10 or over 100? So if you're just 0.1, so like our example here, we had the 0.1, there's only one number after the decimal, which means it's going to be out of 10, not 100. We don't want to say that it's 1 out of 100. That's not true. 1 out of 100 would look like this. So 100, that's what that would look like. So this and this are two very different things. They are not equal to one another. This is 1/10, this is 100. That 0 is a placeholder. It changes our place value. So really use that place value chart to help you as you do these. Remember, your keyword for this lesson is decimals. All right, have a wonderful day.